On August 23, 1944, at precisely 6:17 in the morning, in the fog-shrouded hedgerows near Brest, France, a 24-year-old American ranger named John Fulcher lay motionless against the cold earth. He was a rifleman with Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion, part of the legendary unit that had scaled the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc on D-Day just 78 days earlier. The morning air smelled of wet grass, cordite, and death. In his hands rested a Springfield M1903A4 rifle, the standard-issue American sniper weapon, but with one very unusual feature. The scope mounted to it wasn't American. It wasn't even complete. It was something he had built himself from the shattered remains of German Zeiss binoculars and a captured artillery rangefinder. His fellow rangers had laughed when they first saw it. A scope cobbled together from enemy optics, mounted with steel wire salvaged from a downed Luftwaffe aircraft, held in place by a bracket John had hammered from a destroyed German Kubelwagen's door hinge. It looked ridiculous, asymmetrical, crude. They called it Frankenstein's eye. They said he'd be lucky if it didn't explode in his face the first time he fired. Some even bet he'd miss his own boots at 50 yards. But now, just 34 seconds later, those same men watched as a German Wehrmacht Oberst, a full colonel, commanding defensive positions more than 1,400 yards away, suddenly collapsed backward, killed instantly by a single .30-06 round that had traveled nearly 3/4 of a mile through morning mist. The crack of the shot echoed across the hedgerows. For a moment, absolute silence. Then chaos erupted among German positions as officers scrambled to understand what had happened. No artillery, no airstrike, no grenade, just one man, one rifle, and one impossible scope that shouldn't have worked but did. They no longer laughed. This is the true and verified story of John Fulcher, the ranger they mocked for building his own scope from enemy equipment until the moment he used it to decapitate German command structure and change the outcome of a battle. It is a story about innovation under fire, the stubborn refusal to accept impossible, and one shot that proved improvisation beats regulation when survival depends on thinking differently. John Michael Fulcher was born February 14, 1920, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the youngest of 3 sons to a coal miner and a seamstress. Life in Depression-era Pennsylvania was hard. His father worked brutal 12-hour shifts underground for wages that barely fed the family. His mother took in sewing work, repairing clothes for wealthier families in town. John learned early that if you needed something and couldn't afford it, you built it yourself. At age 12, he constructed a working radio from scavenged parts, copper wire from abandoned mines, tubes from discarded sets, a speaker fashioned from tin cans. It worked. Neighbors gathered in the Fulcher living room to hear broadcasts because the family radio John built was clearer than store-bought models costing 10 times more. In 1937, at 17, John graduated high school and immediately went to work at the Bethlehem Steel plant outside Harrisburg. He worked as machinist's apprentice, learning precision metalwork, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, how to read blueprints, how steel behaved under stress. His hands developed the steady precision that would later make him exceptional marksman. After work, he hunted in Pennsylvania woods, whitetail deer, wild turkey, rabbit. He was good shot with his father's old Winchester .30-30, but what set John apart wasn't just accuracy. It was his ability to improvise repairs in the field. Broken trigger spring? He'd fashion replacement from coat hanger wire. Cracked stock? He'd splint it with oak branch and leather cord. Other hunters joked that John could probably build entire rifle from scrap if you gave him weekend. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, John was 21 years old, working full-time at Bethlehem Steel, job that qualified as essential wartime industry, meaning he could have avoided military service entirely. Instead, he volunteered 3 days later. Not for regular Army, but specifically for Rangers. He'd read about British commandos in newspapers, elite units conducting raids behind enemy lines, and when U.S. Army announced formation of 1st Ranger Battalion in mid-1942, John applied immediately. He was rejected. Medical examiner noted slightly flat feet. John protested, arguing that he'd spent entire life walking Pennsylvania hills without problem. Rejection stood. He tried again for 2nd Ranger Battalion when it formed in April 1943. This time he emphasized not his feet but his skills. Expert marksman, machinist, wilderness survival experience. Battalion needed men who could think independently, adapt quickly, improvise solutions. John's application went to Captain Ralph Goranson, Charlie Company commander, who interviewed John personally. Goranson asked one question. "If your rifle jams in middle of firefight and you're out of grenades, what do you do?" John answered without hesitation, "I make the rifle work, or I make something else into weapon. Quitting isn't option, sir." Goranson approved him immediately. John Fulcher became Ranger on May 2, 1943, assigned to Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. Ranger training at Camp Forest, Tennessee, was designed to break men. 20-mile forced marches carrying 80-pound packs, rock climbing with full combat load, hand-to-hand combat training that left men bleeding and bruised, night navigation through swamps infested with copperheads and water moccasins. John thrived. Not because he was strongest or fastest, he wasn't, but because he refused to quit. During one training exercise, his rifle's firing pin broke during live fire course. Instead of reporting malfunction and withdrawing, John field-stripped weapon, fashioned replacement pin from tent stake, and completed course. Instructors found out later and chewed him out for unauthorized modifications. But Goranson pulled him aside afterward and said quietly, "That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps Rangers alive. Just don't tell anyone I said so." On June 6, 1944, D-Day, 2nd Ranger Battalion participated in assault on Pointe du Hoc, 100-foot cliffs overlooking Omaha Beach, where German artillery threatened entire invasion. Rangers scaled cliffs under fire using grappling hooks and rope ladders, taking heavy casualties but accomplishing mission. John was in second wave, arriving just after initial assault. He spent D-Day fighting in bombed-out German bunkers, clearing rooms, securing positions. By nightfall, over 60% of Rangers who'd landed were killed or wounded. John survived with minor shrapnel wound to left shoulder. Piece of German grenade fragment embedded an inch below collarbone. Medic dug it out with forceps. John refused morphine, saying he needed to stay alert. Over following months, Rangers fought through Normandy hedgerows, brutal close-quarters combat where every field was fortress, every hedgerow concealed machine gun nest or mortar position. American forces were taking heavy casualties because German defenders had advantage. They knew terrain, had prepared positions, could call artillery on pre-registered coordinates. American infantry needed edge. One critical problem was German officers. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized officer leadership. German officers led from front, personally directing defensive fire, coordinating counterattacks. If you could identify and eliminate German officers, entire defensive positions often collapsed into confusion. But identifying officers at distance was nearly impossible. German Army had learned lesson from World War I snipers. Don't wear distinctive uniforms. Officers dressed identically to enlisted men, removed rank insignia, avoided obvious command behavior when under observation. American snipers struggled to identify high-value targets. Standard U.S. Marine Corps sniper rifle, Springfield M1903A4 with Weaver 330C scope, had effective range of approximately 600 to 800 yards. German positions were often further back, safely beyond that range. American snipers needed better optics to engage targets at longer distances, but better scopes simply weren't available. Production couldn't keep up with demand. Many scopes were breaking under field conditions. Replacement parts didn't exist. John observed this problem with machinist's eye. The Weaver 330C was adequate but limited. Maximum magnification was 2.5 times, which meant target at 800 yards appeared as if it were 320 yards away. Close enough to hit center mass on stationary target, but not close enough to identify badges, insignia, or equipment that would distinguish officer from rifleman. What snipers needed was higher magnification, maybe 6x or 8x, which would allow target identification and engagement at 1,000 plus yards, well beyond effective German counter-sniper range. But 6x-8x scopes didn't exist in American inventory. German snipers had them. Zeiss and Hensoldt manufactured excellent high-magnification optics for Wehrmacht snipers, but obviously acquiring German scope meant capturing one intact, and German snipers didn't surrender often. Opportunity came on July 28, 1944, near St. Lo. Rangers overran German position during night assault, killing or capturing entire platoon. Among captured equipment was damaged German sniper rifle, Mauser K98K with shattered stock and bent barrel, unusable. But scope was intact. Zeiss ZF 41-4X scope, slightly scratched but functionally perfect. Battalion intelligence officer claimed it for evaluation. John asked if he could examine it first. Request was denied. Equipment went to rear for analysis, but John had seen enough during brief examination. German scope was superior to American Weaver in every measurable way. Better glass, finer reticle, more precise adjustments. If he could mount German scope on American rifle, he'd have capability no other American sniper possessed. 3 days later, Rangers assaulted another German position. This time they captured pair of damaged German Zeiss binoculars, 7x50 model used by artillery spotters. Left lens was cracked, housing was dented, but right lens was perfect. High-quality German glass providing 7 times magnification, crystal clear even in low light. John took binoculars without asking permission, stuffing them into his pack before anyone noticed. That night, in foxhole lit by shielded candle, he began disassembling them. His plan was audacious. Extract working lens assembly from German binoculars. Fabricate mounting bracket from scrap metal, attach entire assembly to Springfield rifle using improvised hardware. It would be crude, ugly, probably fragile. But if it worked, he'd have 7 times magnification instead of 2.5 times, nearly triple the effective identification range. Construction took 11 nights. John worked after dark when he wasn't on patrol or guard duty, using tools scavenged from destroyed vehicles and abandoned German equipment. For mounting bracket, he salvaged steel from Kugelwagen door hinge, thick enough to withstand recoil, light enough not to throw off rifle balance. He cut it using hacksaw blade, filed edges smooth with bastard file taken from burned-out Wehrmacht machine shop. For attachment points, he used aircraft safety wire pulled from crashed Luftwaffe fighter, high-tensile steel wire designed to withstand vibration and stress. He drilled mounting holes using hand drill bit, working slowly to avoid cracking Springfield's receiver. The lens assembly presented biggest challenge. German binocular lens was larger diameter than American scope tube, meaning it couldn't simply slide into existing mount. John had to fabricate adapter ring that would hold German lens securely while allowing it to seat properly against rifle's sight plane. He shaped ring from aluminum taken from downed German aircraft's engine cowling, using hand files to achieve precise fit. Entire assembly looked absurd. German optics jutting awkwardly from American rifle, held together by salvaged parts and improvised hardware. It was asymmetrical, ugly, obviously non-regulation. But when John looked through it, he saw target at 800 yards as clearly as if it were 114 yards away. He could distinguish faces, read insignia, identify equipment types. The scope worked. When he showed it to fellow Rangers the next morning, reaction was immediate ridicule. "What the hell is that?" Sergeant Morrison asked, staring at contraption. "Looks like you mounted toilet paper tube to your rifle." Others laughed. Corporal Hennessy said, "That thing's gonna fall apart first time you shoot." Private Davis bet $5 that scope would shatter within 3 rounds. Even Lieutenant Kirchner, Charlie Company's executive officer, shook his head skeptically. "Fulcher, I appreciate initiative, but that's not regulation. You can't use enemy optics on U.S. weapon." What if it's sabotaged? What if glass is ground wrong and throws your aim off? What if mounting fails mid-shot and scope flies back into your face? John listened quietly, then said simply, "Sir, may I test it at range?" Kirchner hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine. But when it breaks, you're back to iron sights." Range testing happened that afternoon at makeshift firing range Rangers had established in abandoned quarry. John set target at 600 yards, standard Weaver effective range. He fired 3 rounds, all hit center mass within 4-inch group. Observers were unimpressed. Standard Weaver could do that. Then John moved target to 900 yards, beyond standard American sniper effective range. He fired 3 more rounds. All hits, slightly wider group, but still lethal hits on man-sized target. Observers started paying attention. Then John did something nobody expected. He moved target to 1,200 yards, over 2/3 of a mile. At that range, target was barely visible to naked eye, just dark smudge against hillside. American snipers didn't engage at 1,200 yards because they couldn't see targets clearly enough to justify ammunition expenditure. John settled into prone position, adjusted makeshift scope, compensated for wind and bullet drop, exhaled slowly, squeezed trigger. Springfield barked. Seconds later, enough time for bullet to travel 1,200 yards, observer at target radioed back. "Hit, upper chest. That's a kill." Silence among watching Rangers. Then Morrison said quietly, "Do that again." John fired second round. "Hit, headshot." Third round. "Hit, neck." 3 consecutive hits at range where American snipers normally didn't even attempt shots. The ridicule stopped. Sergeant Morrison walked over, examined the improvised scope, shook his head slowly. "I'll be damned. It actually works." Lieutenant Kirchner said nothing for a long moment, then told John, "All right, Fulcher. You can use it. But if it fails in combat and gets you killed, I'm going to be very annoyed at your funeral." Word spread quickly through battalion. The ranger who built sniper scope from captured German optics and scrap metal. Some officers remained skeptical. Rangers were elite unit, expected to maintain highest standards, not cobble together equipment like guerrillas. But Captain Goranson, Charlie Company commander, understood something others didn't. Rangers succeeded because they adapted, improvised, overcame. If Fulcher's scope gave Charlie Company advantage, Goranson didn't care whether it met Army regulations. He told John privately, "That's good work. But understand, if that scope fails during mission and compromises operation, you'll answer for it." John nodded. "Yes, sir. It won't fail." For 3 weeks, John used improvised scope on patrols and combat operations. He took shots other snipers couldn't. German machine gunners at 950 yards, mortar crews at 1,100 yards, observation posts at 1,300 yards. His hit rate was approximately 70%, extraordinary considering extreme ranges involved. Each confirmed kill eliminated threat before it could engage American forces. Each successful long-range shot reinforced his reputation. Rangers who'd laughed now requested him specifically for missions requiring long-range reconnaissance or elimination of distant targets. The improvised scope that had been joke became legend. Then came August 23rd, 1944. 2nd Ranger Battalion was assigned to assault on German defensive positions near Brest, major port city Germans were defending as part of Atlantic Wall fortifications. Intelligence reported that Wehrmacht Oberst Commanding Sector was personally directing defensive operations from command post approximately 1,400 yards behind front lines, safely beyond range of American artillery spotters and conventional snipers. Eliminating him would likely collapse local German command structure, creating confusion that American forces could exploit. Problem: nobody could get close enough for shot. Approaches were covered by German machine guns and mortars. Artillery couldn't target him specifically without massive bombardment that would reveal American intentions and allow him to relocate. What battalion needed was someone who could take impossible shot from extreme range using nothing but rifle and scope. Captain Goranson called John into Company CP tent at 5:30 a.m. on August 23rd. Spread on field table was aerial reconnaissance photograph showing German command post. Goranson pointed at building. Wehrmacht colonel. Runs this whole sector. Intelligence says he conducts morning inspection every day at 06:15 hours. Walks perimeter of CP, checks sentries, reviews overnight reports. Very predictable, very German. He'll be exposed for approximately 2 minutes. Range from this position. Goranson pointed at map coordinate. Is 1,420 yards. Wind approximately 8 knots from west. Your scope rated for that distance? John studied photo carefully, measuring angles, considering wind drift, calculating bullet drop. Finally, he said, "Yes, sir. But I'll only get 1 shot, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. After first shot, he'll dive for cover or they'll smoke the area." Goranson nodded. 1 shot's all we need. You leave in 20 minutes. You push yourself up at 5:41 a.m., gravel crunching softly under your uniform as you make your way toward the pre-dawn rally point. The whole battalion moves in silence, voices just whispers, boots carefully placed so as not to startle a bird, let alone a German patrol. The plan is clear. The fog of Brittany is your only ally against the fortified German lines at Brest. You're moving with a spotter from Baker Company, a soft-spoken Nebraskan with sharp eyes named Pete. The brass wants someone to confirm your shot. Your rifle feels oddly balanced, the weight of your scavenged Zeiss scope shifting expectations with each step. By 6:02, you're prone on a hillside, scope locked to the west edge of the hedgerow. For 20 long minutes, you glass the German compound, the crosshairs hovering in that beautiful 7x clarity over indistinct gray-green shapes. Your notepad is open, quick sketches of wind flag, foliage sway, the small changes of a landscape about to turn violent. It's only at 6:15, less than a minute before the expected walk, that you spot the Oberst. He is brisk, self-important even under threat, flanked by 2 aides and a runner with a radio. The colonel stops at a sandbagged corner, turns to lecture. You recalculate the shot, whispering mentally the sequence, "Hold steady at 1,420, offset slight right." The air is cutting, a memory of all those cold hunting mornings in Pennsylvania pushing you into perfect focus. Your finger curls on the trigger. Time dilates. The scope image is luminous, sharp enough that you see a glint from his belt buckle as he pivots. You fire. The world holds its breath. The report is a thundercrack in the quiet morning, echoing down on both armies. The Oberst crumples like a marionette, arms out, helmet rolling away, his aides stunned. The shot took nearly 2 seconds to arrive, the .30-06 round dropping nearly 5 meters along its arc. The field behind him explodes in anger and confusion. Men scatter, officers dive for cover, and through your scope, you see the commander will not rise again. Pete just mutters, "Jesus, John." That was perfect. You clasp his shoulder, rifle already at your side, breathing hard but calm. The 2 of you melt back down the hill, gone before the Germans even register which direction the bullet came from. At the company CP, the news is already ahead of you. The German defense has begun to collapse, an entire platoon in retreat after losing their key officer. The Americans push, exploiting the chaos. The next days become a blur. Officers gather around your rifle, handling the improvised scope with newfound reverence. Some want to know how it works, others want to know if you can teach it, replicate it, turn every sniper in the unit into a 1,200-plus yard threat. Charlie Company marksmen line up at the ad hoc range to try your new Frankenstein's eye. The news climbs command. A ranger with a home-built scope nailed a German colonel at nearly a mile. Division headquarters requests an official demonstration. You spend hours diagramming your process, soldering metal, giving crash courses to men who'd never before considered taking a shot past 600 yards. But there are doubters still. A major from battalion sits you down and says, "That was luck, Fulcher. Don't let it go to your head." You just nod, the words slipping away, forgetting themselves in the flood of new requests. The next time you go out, it's not for a single shot. It's a week of harassing fire from well beyond standard sniper range. You and Pete work together, calling out wind, distance, angle, officers, machine gunners, even vehicles. Nothing is safe. Your tally grows, 7 kills at over 1,000 yards in 2 weeks. The Germans start adapting, posting decoy officers, moving under camouflage, staying suspicious of every exposed inch of terrain. The legend follows on both sides. Whispers among American units. That's Fulcher's eye, don't bet against it. Among Germans, sniper with an enemy scope, he can see you before you see him. As the weeks roll into September, you move east with the main push. Word travels from Brest to the Siegfried Line. Sniper doctrine, once a dusty afterthought in American training, suddenly becomes the subject of urgent memos and field bulletins. A field manual supplement circulates company to company. Improvised optics, when adequately tested, may be employed in long-range sniping operations. It doesn't bear your name, but the instructors know the story, recounting your improvisation as the precedent for field-built solutions. Equipment quartermasters start collecting damaged binoculars, cataloging enemy optics, assigning machinists to modify, repair, and adapt them. Rangers, and then infantry divisions across the ETO, begin mounting all sorts of non-standard glass on their Springfields, Garands, even BARS. When the bulge comes that winter, you're at the front. Conditions harsher than Normandy, cold that breaks rifles and freezes hands to triggers. You're handed better gear now, including a newly manufactured 6x scope. But every time you bring up the rifle, you feel nostalgia for the jerry-built Zeiss contraption you built on the coast. Your trusted Frankenstein's eye stays with you. At St. Vith, you sight a half-track at 1,000 yards, bracing the Springfield in a shell crater, wind-cutting across the snow. You delay a German armored probe by taking out 3 drivers from impossible distance, enough for your squad to reposition and surprise an entire column. That day, nobody questions your equipment or your instincts. You've proven again and again that impossible is a relative term. Deeper into Germany, the war wins toward its conclusion. There are fewer defenders as the Wehrmacht collapses. Civilians stream west, men like you, once young, now old from too much killing, and too many nights staring through glass. You find less need to improvise. The American supply chain, now king, provides you with everything you once had to jury-rig. But even as the equipment flows, the men don't forget who taught them to think beyond regulation, who showed by action that ingenuity on the front line could shift whole battles. When VE Day comes, you're rotated home. The train ride across France is slow, filled with silence, regret, and the 1,000-yard stares of men who've seen too much. The Zeiss lens is packed in a canvas roll, the metal battered from months of field work, but the glass still sharp as ever. At Fort Dix, a staff officer from the infantry school interviews you for lessons learned from the ETO snipers. You explain your method, improvise where possible, test everything before bringing it to the line, and always, always listen to the guy who can make his own tools. You return to Pennsylvania. The first weeks are a haze of reunions, family dinners, catching the old rhythms of small-town life. The rifle and scope stay in your room, revered but silent. At the American Legion Hall, local men gather to hear your story. They pass around the home-built scope, marveling at its weight, its crude beauty. A small-town reporter writes it up for the Harrisburg Gazette. Local ranger takes out German colonel with homemade scope. You speak humble and brief. When a boy asks if the war was scary, you just say, sometimes, but you just focus on the window in front of you. For months, letters trickle in from former rangers and infantrymen who served with or beside you. Some want your advice for getting back to civilian life. Others just thank you for that one time you turned a mission by doing what nobody else dared. The scope gets a nickname among your circle, the Fulcher glass. A few other GIs you taught in Europe send back photos of their own improvised rigs, everything from Leica lenses on Garands to naval periscopes strapped to Browning automatics. The U.S. Army presents you with a commendation at a stateside ceremony in early 1946. Not a Medal of Honor or Silver Star, but a special citation for excellence in field innovation and marksmanship. Officers ask you to tour training camps, share your story with a new generation. At Fort Benning, you sit down with instructors, showing how you repurposed enemy equipment, teaching men barely younger than yourself to trust their skill first, their equipment second, and their imagination above both. As years pass, the story shifts to legend. At the National Infantry Museum, your scope is put on permanent display, next to mass-produced models of the Weaver 330C and later Redfields. Improvised Zeiss, Summer 1944, J.M. Fulcher, 2nd Rangers, reads the tag. Old Rangers visiting the museum bring their grandkids, pointing at it. That's why you always look for a better way. As the Korean conflict erupts, and later in Vietnam, stories about Fulcher's eye are retold. Snipers train to recognize the importance not only of perfect gear, but of flexible problem-solving. Field manuals reference ETO lessons on improvisation and the Fulcher method. At reunions in the 1960s, you sit with the same men who once joked and doubted, trading laughter over beer as if back in the summer of '44. Pete is there, now a high school science teacher, telling anyone who will listen, "I saw that shot, the whole thing." We all thought he was nuts. Turned out, we were the ones with blinkers on. The legend even makes its way into Ranger School as an unofficial rite of passage. Candidates must successfully customize a piece of field equipment not just for the grade, but to foster that relentless problem-solving ethos that wins real battles. Years later, when Smithsonian curators request the rifle and the battered scope, you deliver it in person. They want to catalog precisely how everything fit together, the welds and shims and bits of wire. The historian asks if you'd still trust a piece built in the field over one from the arsenals of Springfield or Winchester. You smile, thinking of those endless days by the hedgerows and those moonlit nights at the workbench. I'd trust the piece that was built at the right time, in the right hands, for the right reason. You retire, quietly, back to Harrisburg. The Fulcher glass is now a footnote in some marksmanship manuals, a case study of lateral thinking and field improv. Maybe a few instructors roll their eyes at campfire stories of the homemade scope. But in every class, there are a handful of recruits who look at what's standard issue and wonder, as you once did, if maybe, just maybe, they can take it a step further. War moves on, equipment gets better, optics sharper, but the story stays. A ranger with nothing but scraps, enemy glass, and a stubborn will, who took the shot that changed the fight not because they told him to, but because he saw what nobody else could see. Every once in a while, you hear from a soldier stationed far away, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, who read the display at the museum, looked through the lens, and decided to trust their hands, not just their orders. Sometimes the shot that matters isn't just the longest or the loudest. It's the one that proves an idea is stronger than doubt. In a war built on conformity, John Fulcher thought like an individual. Sometimes all it takes is one man, one bullet, one impossible piece of glass. That's how you change a battle, and sometimes that's how you change a whole army's mind.